I actually need to be out of here at 10:45 today, so
Okay, that's
managed
helpful
to
to know.
overbook myself getting ready for StokerCon.
That brings me to the first couple of questions I wanted to ask, which are a little different than what I've been asking everybody else. So first, could you introduce yourself however you would like to be identified and known to a viewer?
Sure, I am Lisa Morton. I am a writer of fiction, nonfiction. I call myself a reformed screenwriter, and I live in the Los Angeles area.
You're one of our contributors for Dread Monday, under which auspices we're meeting today for a quick interview. You're also participating, and you just mentioned StokerCon. I wanted to talk a little bit about like what the HWA is and what StokerCon is. That's stuff that we've alluded to it in a few of our interviews, but we haven't actually said what HWA means and who belongs to HWA and what it all is all about. So somewhat rapid fire here. What is the HWA and how long have you been involved?
It stands for the Horror Writers Association. It is a global organization of people dedicated to horror literature and film. It has been around for 35 years now, something like that. It gives the annual Bram Stoker Awards. They've been giving those since I think 87. They currently give them in something like 15 categories, and StokerCon started in 2016. It is the organization's official yearly gathering, and it is a 3-day long convention that involves panels and guest speakers and a film competition, the Final Frame Film Competition, a librarian's day, an academic component called the Anne Radcliffe. The big capper is Saturday night with the presentation of the Bram Stoker Awards. And it is being held this week, as we record this, in Stamford, Connecticut. They hold it in a different city every year.
Right. And last year it was in Pittsburgh, right? Or was that 2 years ago?
That was 2 years ago. Last year was San Diego.
Oh, right. Yeah. The first year I was a member of the HWA was that year it was in Pittsburgh. And I felt really bummed out that I couldn't go, not only because it's a big horror town, but because that's where I'm from originally, and I could have stayed with family, but I just couldn't make it happen. That's a really helpful intro to the HWA. How long have you been involved with it?
I have been involved with it since the 90s. A gentleman named Dennis Edgison, who was a local Los Angeles writer and was a friend of mine, was the president of the organization back then, and he got me involved. And by about 2000, I think I was serving as a volunteer within the organization, and I've kept that up over the years. I was the president of the organization from 2014 to 2019. So obviously my volunteer activities are a bit scaled back now, but I love being part of the HWA's mentorship program, and I do a few other fun little volunteer things for them behind the scenes.
That's really cool. And that was how I met you. You were assigned to be my mentor a few years ago. And I just have to tell you, when I'm thinking about like what my next question is, what does the organization do for you and what does it do for newer writers? And as a way of introducing that thought, what it has done for me in part was it assigned me a mentor when I asked to be a part of the mentorship program. And you were said mentor, you were the assigned mentor, and you were so helpful and continue to be so helpful. It felt special to have somebody with a lot of experience, somebody who has won Bram Stoker Awards, somebody who is well known in the horror community, giving me feedback. I felt special getting some feedback from you. Beyond that, it was just very helpful feedback. And it was reassuring when you were able to say honestly that you thought it was a pretty good story in a given case. That gave me a little bit more of what I needed to keep submitting and to keep writing and to keep going. It was really encouraging. And I think that the sense of encouragement and belonging are the two things that I have gotten that have been really important in the last 3 years. And it's why if I were to let any organizations lapse memberships, it wouldn't be the HWA until I ran out of money, because it's been so cool. So thank you for that. That's what it has done for me. I wonder if you could speak to your experience of what it
Well,
does for
I
you.
get the same thing out of the mentorship. Truthfully, I love working with less experienced writers and bringing them up, and that's a huge thing for me. And when I was president, I was very proud to be able to put some of that into even broader effect. The HWA, for example, offers a variety of scholarships now. They offer diversity grants. We have a monthly column called the Sears Table, which explores some of the newer writers, different voices who are coming along in the genre, and promotes that and offers that information publicly. And the organization does outreach to libraries and a newsletter and all kinds of really wonderful things. And that sense of organization and belonging is so important, I think. And it's can be really important to a newer writer, especially, but to those of us who've been around for a while, I think it's just as important. And I love being able to just help writers, other writers. So that's a big thing for me.
I have found that my experience working with you is not isolated. Like that community of support from HWA members, in particular, horror writers generally, really is very positive. Like Sam Weller was in our last anthology. He has also got a ton of experience, and he's well known in his field and outside of it as well. And he was similarly very supportive and helpful. And to have an organization that makes as a specific goal to support less experience level writers and publishers, etc., like that's been just great. Kudos on broadening that platform and that facilitation of relationship building, because it has helped me to feel confident. And who knows, without the HWA, I might not have started Whisper House Press and might not be bringing these other voices into the conversation. These people who, many of them have never published a short story, and the majority of them have, but there's a bunch of new writers in both these collections, and just to be able to bring them to the fore and magnify voices that don't get a lot of magnification sometimes, that's been really cool. And I think I owe the HWA for that in some not small way. One thing that it might be for folks who are just learning about the HWA for the first time, and it was a little bit tricky for me to understand at first, that there are actually like different categories of membership. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on it, but like, what does it mean to be a member of the HWA? And when you join first, what are you likely to be joining as if you're a newer writer? What are the different levels of participation and categories
There
of
are
membership?
really three. There are some other things like associate, which is mainly for booksellers or academics or something. The three main levels really are active, affiliate, and supporting. Now, anybody can join as a supporting member. You don't need to have sold a single piece of writing yet or have placed something anywhere. You can join, and you will get a lot out of being a supporting member. You can apply for the mentorship program. You can submit to the organization's official anthologies, which happen not as often as they'd like, but every couple of years they will get an anthology, which is being published by a major publisher, and there will be slots open for member submissions. And so that can be a great way for a newer writer to get their name out there. And affiliate membership is when you have sold something. I think the rules still state that you just need to have made $25. You can join as an affiliate member. And then active is when you're at the top level. You get to vote on everything. Anyone can recommend works for the Bram Stoker Award, but only active members get to vote on the final works. And so it's kind of nice to join as a supporting member, and you can work your way up. It gives you a really nice goal to become an active member, I think.
Yeah, and it's not like a pay to play scheme or anything.
Yeah.
It's like really about experience level, and they're like perks to being more experienced, and it gives me an incentive, an added incentive beyond just I want to keep writing. Like I joined as a supporting member, and I sold a few horror stories and became an affiliate member, and now I have this goal. I really want to be an active member, so I get to vote on stuff. And I like the level of involvement that I have, but I want to be more involved and I want to be able to vote. It would make me, again, I like to feel special. It would make me feel special if I get to vote on stuff. I already like that as a member that gets to recommend stuff. I've opted in and I sometimes get free horror stuff to read. And then I can recommend to the HWA if I think that thing should be nominated. And the first one I nominated was Johnny Compton's The Spite House, and the second one I suggested for nomination was The Black Guy Dies First, about Black representation in horror. And it felt really cool to just be able to say, hey, I think these are good enough. Somebody should pay attention to these things. So even as an affiliate member, it's pretty cool, but I now have this goal. I want to publish more. I want to be, it seems like active members tend to be the full-time writers or close to full-time writers. I think as I looked at it, I thought, hey, maybe one way in is if I am, now that I have a publishing company, like maybe there's some way to be an active member because of that. And basically it has to be my job. Like I can't be my side gig. It has to be my main gig. That's kind of the short version of it. I hope to be a active member sooner rather than later. That's my goal.
There.
I hope. I appreciate that sentiment, moral support. Before we go on to the piece you wrote for this and some other stuff that I wanted to mention, the last kind of like nuts and bolts thing about the HWA, how are nominees determined? And I'll link in our conversation, like below our conversation, I'll link the HWA's Bram Stoker Award like nominee list, and I'll put some info in there. But how are those nominees determined? And then same question with the winners. How do you win a Bram Stoker Award?
Can be eligible. I mean, as long obviously as it's horror and matches certain criteria like length and so forth. You do not have to be a member to have a work recommended or be nominated or win. And any member of the organization can recommend a work, like you said, The Spite House, which, by the way, was fabulous. You loved the book, so you recommended it for the award. And at that point, it moves on to a recommendations list. Now, if it gets enough recommendations by the end of the year and puts it at the top of the number of recommendations, it will become a nominee. And there are two paths to becoming a nominee, though. There are the member recommendations, and there are also juries. And the juries are really important because the juries are reading everything. When you agree to become a juror, you are going to spend a significant amount of the coming year just reading. And they will read hundreds of works. And the juries will then come up with their top selections. So there will be first a preliminary ballot, and that'll have 10 works in each category, and those are half from the members, half from the juries. And then from that, the active members vote. So the active member vote then determines what becomes officially a nominee and then what wins.
Yeah, that's Quinn.
Hi, Quinn.
He comes in and hangs out with me a lot while I'm writing, editing.
Nice.
Yeah, he's my writing buddy. He'll sit here for hours with me. It's pretty cool. Okay, so that's how people win and what the different juries are. So as regards the collection Dread Mondays, and to which you made I requested that you submit something, and you submitted that thing, and it was great. For this collection, and this is related to your last explanation, I know that I'm going to be submitting this collection and Costs of Living, the other collection that Whisper House Press is doing this fall, to the appropriate jury. So I guess that would be our way to get somebody's eyes on it. I mean, I have a feeling there are some HWA members who are going to look at these collections at some point, whether or not I submit them to juries, because I've been sending ARCs out everywhere and praying that somebody will look at it and think that it's cool. And I'm going to send it to the right jury. Hopefully there's some instructions on the website to help me do that. This is all it's all a learning curve for me. It's all a learning experience. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how often is it the juried things that get picked versus the recommendation things that get picked? Is it kind of a fair mix? Like, what are my chances?
First of all, Steve, I'm going to make one tiny correction in something that you said, which is that you actually are editing an anthology. That difference between collection and anthology gets confused a lot. but it's kind of crucial. A collection is all stories by a single author. So
Okay.
if you are submitting something to the Bram Stoker Awards, be sure you go to the right category. If you are a single author and if you've self-published your collection, that's great. Submit that. Make sure you
Okay.
submit it to the collection jury. For you, you will want to submit it to the anthology jury. And yeah, absolutely, absolutely, everyone should do that if they think their work is really good. You go to the bramstokerawards.com and you will see a big button right at the top that says submissions.
Could you introduce your piece, however you'd like to introduce it, elevator pitch or the log line or whatever you might want to say about When Darkness Comes?
When Darkness Comes is a piece that is set in a bookstore. I actually have a dual career. I am both a writer and a bookseller. I've worked in bookstores since I was 14 and I love bookstores and I don't know if I can easily give up working there. So my story is set in a bookstore that is in the middle of a sort of apocalyptic happening. Society is breaking down, strange things are coming from other dimensions or rampaging after dark at night. And what the story is really about is not just the people at the center who are trying to figure out how to live through this, but the importance of literature, about how we need literature and art in these dark and scary times. When you first mentioned that the book was Dread Mondays and would be set in workplaces, obviously it made sense to me to do a bookstore. And it was important to me, though, to suggest that this bookstore is trying to remain functioning and almost normal in the midst of these extraordinary circumstances, because they do believe in what they're doing. And that's something that has always been important to me, too.
That's a great introduction to your story, and it speaks to the level of depth that sometimes folks don't notice or don't appreciate or don't think about when it comes to horror stories. My wife and I watched Sinners, and her comment after was, if they could, she doesn't like vampire stories. So she and I differ on this in this regard. I really like vampire stories, especially when it's like a new twist or a new take, and she doesn't like vampire stories. So at the end, when we were talking about it, she said, well, I kind of like the story, but I wish they could have like made their point without the vampires. And I said, well, I don't think it would have, it doesn't really hit the same. I mean, the vampires are like a manifestation. In this case, I was thinking it was kind of like assimilation. The Black community, to survive, you must assimilate. That was kind of part of what was going on there, in my mind anyway, in my interpretation. I don't think when she watches horror, and I don't want to speak for her, she's not a big horror fan like I am. When she watches horror, she's not looking necessarily at those underlying metaphors. Like reading your story, she might just think, oh, this is just a story about an apocalyptic happening all around a bookstore. And maybe she likes that and maybe she doesn't. But she's not necessarily thinking, oh, it is like kind of how bookstores are trying to function today, or institutions of learning are trying to function today with a lot of pressures from the outside and all of that. There's a lot going on in the real world that your story can make us think about in a way that's not just a boring lecture. And that's kind of how I think about what horror literature can do. It can be subversive and it can push boundaries and ask us to think about what's going on in our society.
Absolutely.
What do you think about that?
And you know what? If you want to just read it or watch it for entertainment, that's great too. But that is one of the things that I've always loved about horror, is that the best horror does have that subtext, that current running just under the surface. And if you want to dive into that, great. If you don't, if you just want to be scared or disturbed and watch something fun or read something fun, that's fine too. I always loved the stuff with undercurrents. I think has certainly been a huge part of the success of Sinners. People want things, I think, that speak to them on a deeper level. And it's the kind of thing that I've always tried to write.
So I don't think about it. I'm just trying to want to be honest in what I'm thinking, what I'm saying here. I don't necessarily start out like, I'm going to write a message story.
Right.
I get the idea of like kind of a cool situation or a scary situation, and I play that out. But then when I look at it, often in looking back in the revision stage, I try to see like, well, what else is going on here, and can I strengthen that element of it? And then I might add or subtract, and it helps me to think about what the story is about. And the story is about a thing happening, but it's also about a perspective or kind of a philosophical investigation. And I come from a background of philosophy, so I think about fiction as thought experiments, and like first and foremost as thought experiments. So yeah, I've always looked for those deeper messages, but I appreciate that thought too. Like however people want to enjoy it is great. Wouldn't want to tell somebody don't enjoy Lisa Morton's story for these reasons. Only enjoy them on these grounds. But I do like that horror can do that. It's always pushed.
Yeah, it's funny. I was recently in my monthly author newsletter, I was writing about how I have recently read a number of monster stories from friends and so forth. And they were good, fun, scary stories, but they didn't have that extra punch. And one of my advices to writers is to go ahead. If you want to write the fun story, that's fine. But maybe you want to look at it a little bit more and say, well, what is my monster really about? What's really going on here? Sure, I can write a story in which a weird monster just rampages and kills people, and it will be fine. It will be fun. But maybe if I look at it and say, oh, wait, is my monster actually an expression of rage? Is my monster actually about divisions within my family? I mean, it can be, whatever. And if you can find that out and put that into the story as that subtext, I think it makes it more powerful.
Totally. As you're talking, I'm thinking, like, I kind of have rapid fire of the books that I've read in the last few years. And I think about Nick Cutter's The Handyman Method, which is a husband and wife situation in a new house. And the husband is obsessed with renovating this house, and he starts to like kind of lose his mind. What happens is, and this maybe symbolic thing is, there's a crack in the house, physical crack in the house, kind of like Fall of the House of Usher, and the crack gets bigger as the story goes on and as the husband and wife are getting further apart. And so that to me is like, yeah, there's this symbol of the difficulties in their marriage and their relationship and how much they trust each other. And then at the same time, I think about a story like there's a guy, last name of Miklos, who is a Horror Writers Association member, who this month is putting out a book called Tick Town. And it's a intentionally pulpy horror story about a bunch of big ticks attacking a Midwestern town. And it is really great. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't read any social, political messages, and I loved that story. So yeah, there certainly, I don't have any firm and fast rule. I must get heavy social commentary from all of my horror, but it can be really well done in either case. Does anything spring to mind to you, something you've really liked that was just kind of fun and games?
Well, something like one of my favorite pieces of horror from the last 5 years or so was a Netflix series called Marianne. And it's one of these shows that almost no one has seen, but the horror writers I know who have seen it have all gone insane over it. It is so good, so scary. And it's what the extra things going on in that are fairly, they're not transgressive. There's definitely a sort of uncomfortableness with aging that's in this show. The protagonist is a very young, hip female horror writer, which is something a lot of us love seeing. But it's, it's just there to scare the heck out of you, and it does a fantastic job. That's one that I loved. I also think of something like my all-time favorite writer is Dennis Etchison, who I mentioned earlier as being the person who got me involved in HWA, and I was so lucky to know him. And one of my all-time favorite stories by him is called The Dog Park, and it's a story that is so fascinating because it's like a magic trick to me. On the surface, there is nothing going on in this story. It's about two people who are walking their dogs in a dog park. That's it. And then as they talk, they start to realize that there have been some odd things happening in the neighborhood. And as they're there in the dog park, they start to just get a sense that something is not right. And by the time this story is over, you are so incredibly creeped out and you're not sure how it happened. And then as you think about it, you realize that there is definitely more going on in this story. There is definitely a class thing going on. There are the rich houses that surround the dog park, and there's something very disturbing about those. And it's a story that I have read many times and studied, and it's an amazing piece of work. So I recommend Dennis Etchison to everyone.
I'm gonna check him out. I've never read anything by him. I appreciate the recommendation. And I am being mindful of the clock here. I know you have 7-ish minutes. So I've been asking everybody this question, and it's, what does horror mean to you? How do you tell, like, this counts as horror for me personally? What do you think about when you think about what horror is?
I think it's all about intention. You can take, for example, a paranormal romance, and you can look at it, and it's got vampires and werewolves and zombies and whatever, but the intention is not to horrify you. So to me, even though it has all of those sort of tropes in it from the horror genre, it's not horror. To me, the intention is absolutely always has to be to scare you, to horrify you, to disturb you. That is what defines the horror genre to me. And I know it's been argued that it's not a genre, it's just a feeling, but I think it is a genre. It does certainly, it can have tropes, the haunted house, the vampire, whatever. It doesn't have to have those. But I think it's always about that. What is the writer's real intention in this piece?
That's interesting, and it makes me want to ask you, this seems to be a dividing line among folks who think differently about horror. Do you count the second Alien movie as a horror movie or an action movie?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow. You know, I might almost just make it a science fiction action movie, because I don't know that there's anything in it that I found incredibly scary or disturbing or frightening. Or, I mean, I suppose there are those elements in there, but they don't seem to be at the fore. I mean, certainly you can have a work that has horror elements in it or individual scenes or whatever, and it's, if that's still not your primary intent, then I don't think it qualifies as horror. And it does seem to me like the primary intent of Aliens was to thrill you, give you a thrill ride. So in a way, it's more of a thriller, action, sci-fi thing, I think.
I appreciate that perspective. And then it gives me trouble because personally, when I read horror or watch horror, this isn't too shocking. I'm not in it for the scares. I don't always know what is scary to other people. And I don't, because I often don't feel scared myself about things that are really scary to other folks. I tell people this not as a boast, but just because I'm kind of confused. I just don't know really what's going to scare people. So when I write what counts as horror, it's not an intent to scare. And so then I have to find some other way in. What does horror mean? It's something that has the discomfort as its core, or a sense of an ominous sense of dread, maybe. When I think, though, about, so I was just reading galleys of a short story I have coming out with Timber Ghost Press in the fall. And it's a story about a guy who goes into the desert on a drive to clear his head after an argument with his child. And it was like every other night, any other night he's gone into the desert to do this drive. But this night he sees a light in the distance and he follows it on some back road, and he ends up in kind of like an alternate dimension sort of situation. And he witnesses, by means that are in the story, he witnesses the death of his child. It is horrific, and he can't get out of this other dimension, and he can't get back to his child, and he can't prevent the bad thing from happening. But I don't imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't imagine somebody reading that and saying, I'm very scared right now. I think they might read it and say, this is upsetting, I'm uncomfortable, this is making me think about my relationship with my kids and how maybe I'm being dismissive of them or whatever. So then it causes kind of tension within me when I think about, okay, if the definition of horror is something like intent to scare, I get kind of unmoored when it comes to trying to identify what counts. And I know everybody's definition can be different, and I don't want to try to change your mind about it.
If you
but I'm just
extend the word horror, you get horrify. So certainly it can be about horrifying the reader, rather than, the jump scare or whatever. Right. You think about something like cosmic horror, which doesn't have jump scares or even gore sometimes. It's just about that sense that something is very wrong with the universe, and it leaves you disturbed and feeling very uncomfortable. And that's one of the great things about the genre, is it's broad enough to include all of these different ways in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I realize we're out of time, and I don't want to keep you longer than we have. So let's just wrap here, because I know you're on a tight time crunch. I really appreciate you making time, coming to chat with me and submitting and helping with some short stories I've written and just all of that, and for your work in the HWA. I hope that folks watching feel like they've got to know you a little bit and got to know the HWA a little bit by hanging out with us.
Thank you, Steve. And I have to say that if I've had any little part in promoting and helping you along in your career, I'm really, really proud of that. That's some of my proudest stuff. And I think you are going to do insanely well. You're already a really good writer and editor. And so keep it going.
Thanks. That means a lot. I appreciate it. All right. Have a great day. Have a great StokerCon. I hope everything goes swimmingly, and I'll let you know when our interview is posted.
All right, great. Thanks.